understanding the emerging fields of geography. So today I'm going to discuss briefly about the emerging research areas in geography and how we can answer some of these research questions which come across in our day-to-day routine life. So what I'm going to do for the next 30 minutes is I'm just going to take you through various steps and concerns that we share commonly in geography and try to help us understand how we can address some of these research issues that we address. So as we all know that geography is essentially an integrated science. So we look at various research questions from the perspective of social sciences, from the perspective of natural sciences. So suppose if, all of us are today caught in our house and we are working from home. Reason being that everybody is trying to save themselves from the risk of contracting coronavirus. So this is a new challenge that has come before all of us. So people, those who are studying geography, people, those who are studying economics, sociology, physical sciences, natural sciences, all of them are, for example, today trying to address this problem of coronavirus. So how geographers can come out with their understanding to address problem like COVID-19. So say, for example, if we have to understand the problem at hand, coronavirus, how as a geographer we can look at this problem? So when I say that geography is essentially an integrated sciences, I mean that we are essentially interested in addressing questions such as, what is the problem? So problem at hand is corona pandemic. Where is it located? Now, corona is such a huge threat to human society that more than 200 countries in the world are today affected by coronavirus. So the first question was, what is the problem? So like in geography, asked what is the problem? So the problem is, for example, in this case is coronavirus. The second issue is where the problem is located. What is the spatial location of the issue? So this is the pandemic that we are looking at the global scale. The third question is when. So the question of time. Whenever we talk about geography as an integrated sciences, we are focused with addressing the issue of what, where, when. So, if you look at corona in the last 3-4 months, the infection has really spread across. There is hardly any territory or country in the world which is left out of these pandemics effects. So, this is located everywhere, but the risk is concentrated in few pockets. So this is an important point to note that of course this is a threat for everyone, but there are specific regions, specific locations where we observe that the threat is increasingly high. For example, if you take case of India, there are a few states where the risk or the cases of corona have come up in a huge number as compared to some other states. So for example, if you take case of Delhi region, or you take case of Maharashtra, right, case of UP or Madhya Pradesh or Gujarat, these are some of the states where, we observe relatively larger number of corona epidemic cases as compared to other eastern or the northeastern states in India. So the first question is the problem identification. This second important focus is looking at the spatial extent of the problem. Third important focus is looking at the temporal perspective, at what time point, right? And the fourth question is to understand why or how a particular problem is taking place, why it is higher concentrated in some area vis-a-vis in some other areas. So these are 3 or 4 important preoccupations with which geographers address various questions, right? So today I'm just talking about corona epidemic because this is something which is, everybody is concerned with. You can answer many other questions. For example, if you want to understand the issue of climate change, if you want to explain the issue of landslides, right? So if you have to understand the problem of landslide, what do you do? So first you identify the topic, the problem, which is landslide, risk of landslide, how does it vary across various places? So you identify the problem, then you go to identify the area. So suppose I want to study the risk of landslide in places like Nainital or Uttarakhand and many other places like Pithoragarh. So the entire district of Pithoragarh is my research area. Now I want to understand, okay, at what is the time duration when I want to study the problem of landslides in Uttarakhand. So then I say, okay, I identified the problem, I identified the location, and I also identified the time duration. Now I have to identify the risk factors, right? Or the triggering factors which causes the landslide in Uttarakhand district. So from theory or from the literature, we can identify the list of various factors which are responsible for triggering landslides. It could be, for example, the vegetation cover, it could be slope, it could be geology, it could be human activities, right? It could be rainfall, various kind of factors which are responsible. So through this lecture or this discussion, I also want to focus on the methodologies which we can use to explain some of these research questions, and particularly in geography, the question of how and why has gained a lot of momentum in last 20-25 years. Because before that, our major focus was largely to understand the spatial patterning of problems, right? Research problems, for example, agricultural productivity, right? Problem of human settlements, problem of slums, problem of poverty, problem of gender inequalities, problem of food production, problem of undernutrition. So all these problems, people in those who are doing geographical research, they have addressed most of this problem, and the largely focus of all the geographers has remained towards, looking at the spatial differentials, looking at the spatial patterning, trying to understand like why it is so. But most often than not, like a lot of people, those who are using quantitative techniques to explain the spatial differentiations, employ various techniques. And I want to focus today mostly on two techniques. One is the correlation that people use to understand the association, and the next one is the regression analysis. I want to talk about the merits, the limitations, and when we can employ these techniques. So just to give you an idea, for example, like today, a lot of us are doing research on COVID-19. So for instance, if you want to understand the differentials in the vulnerability of COVID-19 in India today, using the state level data, because most of the data that we have is essentially available at the state level. So what we can do, we can first of all look at the spatial differential in the vulnerability of COVID-19. We only have data on the number of cases, confirmed cases that we get from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. So as of now, when I'm speaking, we have crossed almost 35,000 confirmed cases of corona epidemic. However, these cases are not equally spread. So basically, these cases are concentrated in 4 or 5 major states of India, including Delhi, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, some of the states which actually comprise for more than 50% of the cases. And the remaining, say 25 states and union territory occupy for the remaining 50% of cases. So there is a clear-cut spatial heterogeneity in terms of the risk of corona in India. Not everyone in India facing the similar risk. So the vulnerabilities are not exactly the same. So as a social scientist, as a geographer, our major preoccupation is to kind of delineate these spatial hotspots and understand what are the major factors which might be associated with these risks, right? So again, I will come back and forth reminding us about the 4 important questions: what, where, how, and why, right? And of course, the time dimension into it. So if you look at today's, the epidemic of corona, and you look at the spatial patterns, there are 5-6 states which are actually catering to the larger number of cases. Now, if we have to explain the vulnerability in terms of contracting corona in India, we can refer to the existing knowledge literature, right? So there are vulnerability differences because of spatial locations. There are also vulnerability differentiation because of the demographic composition of the population of a given area. So for example, research is showing us that, the risk is relatively higher, is not uniformly across population groups, right? It varies across population groups. So when I speak about population group, I'm referring to the age composition. So we have seen recently in various parts of the world that population which are relatively older in composition tends to have higher risk of contracting corona epidemic. I'm not trying to say that all other younger people have no risk. I'm just saying on an average, if you compare the risk of contracting corona is relatively higher among elderly. So what we can do? So if you want to explain the differences in the concentration of pandemic corona in India, you have to factor in the age profile of the population. So we can take 4 or 5 major important factors, and then we can look at the association of how corona might be associated with these 4 or 5 factors. So research shows that age composition of population is a critical factor. Second important factor is, urbanization, because we have seen that most of these cases have come from outside, right? So potentially the migrants who are coming from outside, either from international border or from cities to the rural areas. So therefore the migration component Urbanization and migration are important variables when we have to explain the differentials or vulnerability differentials of corona epidemic in India. So first is the age composition. The second could be proportion urbanization in a given state. So the hypothesis could be like states that have higher proportion of urbanization potentially tends to have higher risk of contracting corona epidemic. And third could be, of course, migration. So we can have two variables on migration. One is the migration within country and migration between from other country to our native place or host country, right? So we can have the variables on migration, we can have variable on the urbanization, we also have a variable on age composition of population. Beyond this, I think it's one of the important other factor is that vulnerability also varied by the type of occupation that you are working, right? So population which is working in more hazardous occupational category. For example, if you look at today scenarios, all those people who are medical professional, because of the nature of the work that they are doing, are actually exposing them to high risk. Similarly, people those who are working in police services, people those who are working in daily, those who are municipal workers, those who are catering to essential supplies, all the people today who are working for essential services are at greater risk. Similarly, people who are unorganized sectors, right? And many of them have to leave out their jobs because the nature of the lockdown demanded that they have to go back and stay at home. So, we want to, one can tease out these various categories in terms of occupation, right? So people, those who are working in casual laborers, people who are working as salary job, people, those who are working at agriculture and non-agriculture. So all these occupational categories also a category which can influence the nature of vulnerability that people have in terms of contracting corona epidemic. And then we can also look at the extent of economic deprivation, because one day, we all know that if somebody is stuck with COVID epidemic, then how he or she is going to come after. Even when we become, after diagnosis and treatment, there is no 100% guarantee you cannot get corona again. So the economic standing of people is also associated with the risk of fighting corona epidemic. So we can take these 4, 5, 6 important factors, which we call in our research as independent factors, which can help us to explain the vulnerability differentials in contracting corona epidemic. So we can build a model. So a model that can help us to understand, the differential vulnerability of contracting corona. So suppose when we conceptualize a problem and we try to model that problem, we have various functional components. So we can model it in a form of regression, where we want to model the differential vulnerability of contracting corona. And in this case, our dependent variable or the response variable. What is a dependent variable? It is nothing but the main research question that we are addressing, right? So in this case, suppose we want to address the question of contracting corona epidemic, right? So our dependent variable is number of corona positive cases. That is our dependent variable. And then we have a set of independent variables which we have identified through our literature review, and we have collected data upon. So these are a range of X factors, which we call explanatory factors, which can help us to explain the differential vulnerability in the contracting COVID-19 epidemic. So for example, our first explanatory factor is the age composition or proportion elderly in the population. Our second explanatory factor is proportion urbanization. And please remember that we are doing this analysis at the aggregated level, right? So, whenever we are doing a research in social sciences, one of the important consideration is to understand the level, the unit of analysis. So this is an analysis, suppose we are, because of the availability of data, right? Ideally, we would love to do the research on looking at the individual cases, but because we don't have any data that tells you the confirmed cases at individual level, we only get the data from the ministry at the aggregated level, right? Maximum up to state or district level. We don't know how individuals are working, so we have no idea about individual variability. We only know data up to district and state level. So if you want to explain the variability in COVID-19 at the state level, so we have the dependent variable of number of COVID-19 positive cases at the state level. And likewise, we have the explanatory factors, which are also measured at the state level. Then only we can look at the association between X and Y factor.